Elsewhere in this insane country on Saturday, Hawaii resident and convicted felon Ryan Routh, it's Routh, right, was arrested after allegedly attempting to assassinate Donald Trump at the former president's golf club in West Palm Beach. There's a second assassination attempt on Trump that has been quickly buried in the news cycle. We are not talking about this at all. We're still interested here, though, and what I discovered, because of a certain River Page who writes for the Free Press, this guy has a book. He wrote a book that looks to be self-published. I don't think this was, Simon Schuster or anything. But this crazy book, River, you subjected yourself to this book. What did you come away with after reading Comrade Routh's book?
Yeah, 5 out of 5 on my Goodreads. No, it's crazy. So, I mean, to explain like Ryan Routh, I mean, in a couple of words, a feminist, unexpectedly, he thinks women should be in the leadership of every country. He's a drug addict, I believe. You can just sort of tell by the frenetic kind of writing style, and also his criminal record. He was like stealing stuff and selling it for crack back in the 90s. Undecided voter. I don't know. Like his politics are like just so weird and like inconsistent. At first, like as I was reading, I like wrote in my notes, I was like neocon John Hinckley, and then I had to like cross it out because I was like, oh wait, it's actually not that. He believes that the Russian-Ukraine war was like existential for democracy in every country all over the world. Which is kind of something a lot of people in the media were saying shortly after that invasion. Some of our, friends and colleagues in like the Atlantic Council of Foreign Relations, people in Northern Virginia, whatever. But this guy actually believed it. And to that end, he thought that Trump should be assassinated for going back on the Iran nuclear deal because he believes that it drove Iran into the arms of the Russians, which I don't know, maybe there's some truth to that. But he said that the Iranians should assassinate Trump, and they should also assassinate him for voting for Trump because he used to be a Trump voter. And
a pretty coherent set of views is what you're saying.
Sure, exactly. He was like, why isn't Barbados sending troops to Ukraine? And it's like the crazy.
That's the question everyone's asking.
Right.
I mean, come on.
So yeah, I mean, this guy is insane. I don't think that like I said, I think he's probably on like crack or like meth maybe. I don't think that he's crazy, but I don't think he's like a schizophrenic. Like what he wrote was like coherent enough that like I actually do think that he knew what he was doing. Like when he tried to kill Trump, I think he was doing it as retribution for Trump going back on the Iran deal, which he views as somehow like transforming like the direction of the war in Ukraine. Because he brings it up over and over again.
I was being a critic of the Iran deal, I don't think is the craziest thing. Actually, we have a clip. I'm going to go back to this. We have a clip because, to get a sense of who this guy is, there's a brief clip of him talking to Batya's colleagues at Newsweek a couple of years ago. If we could pull that up, because it gives you kind of a sense of, as River said, the kind of frenetic nature of this guy. Do we have that?
They're like, well, I have no military experience, so they're like, you're not an ideal candidate. So they said, not right this minute. So plan B was to come here to Kyiv and promote getting more people here. We need thousands and thousands and thousands of people here fighting with the Ukrainians.
So his idea was to dress like a complete lunatic, go to Kiev and say people should come here. Maybe
he tried to join.
Right? Maybe you should recruit in like Cleveland or something. But look, what happens with this, and I know that this wasn't your purpose, is people trying to divine his politics, right? This happens at every shooting, every event like this, and hoping that they can score a win for their side and say, this is the rhetoric. This is actually what the Trump campaign is doing now. And here's a brief clip from a campaign ad that is essentially making the same point.
If you had to be stuck in an elevator with either President Trump, Mike Pence, or Jeff Sessions, who would it be? Does one of us have to come out alive?
Oof, that laugh. It wasn't that funny, Kamala. Abigail, if you watch into this stuff, I mean, there's a couple things there that I want to throw to you. Is that it's a joke. I mean, it's a dumb joke. It's not suborning an assassination. Get off of it. Stop being snowflakes about this. But this happens every time. Conservatives get very upset about it when it happens, and they say the rhetoric, and this is Trump's rhetoric, and you see this all the way back to Sarah Palin being blamed for the craziest person of all time, Jared Loughner, shooting Gabby Giffords, right? And that is actually a thing that's still going on, because Sarah Palin is suing the New York Times, and that case is still going, more than 10 years later. Were you surprised that Republicans were taking the same tactic? And it seems like a lot of people are. My sense is it just looks really bad for them when they argue the opposite thing when people are blaming their rhetoric for a shooting.
Well, look, I mean, I think exactly as you said, this is standard fare in politics. Steve Scalise, when he was shot, Gabby Giffords, when she was shot, immediately everyone runs to blame the Republicans for their rhetoric. And now the Republicans are doing the same thing. And in some sense, this is just politics as usual. They're in the run up to the election. They're trying to score whatever points they can. And I do think usually it's somewhat disingenuous. People don't actually believe that these kind of, heated rhetoric necessarily, certainly that they can't make a causal link to these kinds of extreme violent, acts of violence. But I will say this, look, President Trump has just been through 2 assassination attempts. So that's a lot. I mean, I think we can all agree that's kind of a lot. And I think that, look, we have to be honest. The amount of hatred and revulsion he inspires is really unique. Now, he also inspires a lot of ardor and loyalty and love in a different segment. But the sort of pre-rational revulsion of some segment of the population is intense. And the rhetoric around him has been very heated. And in general, it would be good, if we all dialed down the tone of the political record, rhetoric. I think that would be good. We would all agree on that. So, I guess the blaming each other's side, I tend to think of as pretty standard.
Yeah, I mean, you can't lose on kind of dialing down the rhetoric a bit. I'm going to put this to both River and Batya. Somebody jump in, raise your hand, start shouting like a lunatic if you agree with this, because I want to see if anyone does agree with this. Do either of you think that the argument for the Trump campaign is sensible, that it is the rhetoric? And now, keeping in mind that both of these people seem to be very crazy. These aren't just kind of normal, Gavrilo Princip types taking out the Archduke. These are some crazy people. But do either of you think, and chime in first, if you think that that there's a point to that the rhetoric is creating an environment that produces 2 attempts within a month plus of each other?
What do you think, River?
I mean, I think it's a good political strategy. I don't think it's correct, because with the Crooks guy, the first guy, we have no idea what his politics were, because he's like weirdly didn't have social media, and like was a Republican, but then donated to like some Act Blue thing or whatever. With this guy, Ryan Ruth, he was sort of like propagandized but not by like typical like Democratic Party fodder. It was all Ukraine related stuff. Like some of the things that he was saying in his book was lifted from certain articles at some certain publications that, like, I'm not going to name names, but like it was he was, sort of subjecting himself, I think, to a lot of propaganda on like the importance of the Ukraine war and like how necessary it was that Ukraine, the Donbass region of the Ukraine, remain democratic for, the fate of the entire world, like crazy stuff like that. Like but he wasn't like a somebody who follows Nancy Pelosi on Twitter or something, you know what I mean? Like, or like he's not like a regular Democrat. So I think that it's sort of disingenuous, but I think it's probably a pretty good strategy to just be like, the Democrats want me dead. Cause like, if you don't look into any of this stuff, like it kind of does seem like, people do keep trying to kill him. And there has been a lot of heated rhetoric. So you can put 2 and 2 together doesn't necessarily mean that it's true given these two cases, but it's a decent political argument. I'll say that.
Batya, we've had 9 years up until these two attempts, the first two, I mean, right next to each other, with the possibility of Trump having a second term. 9 years of people effectively calling him a Nazi, comparing him to Mussolini and Hitler, et cetera. Nothing has happened in this way in those past 9 years. Is there something different about now? And do you actually put any stock in that argument that the rhetoric is so hot right now that what do you expect?
Here's what I want to understand. If both sides have a rhetoric problem, how come only one person is getting shot at, and it's the guy on the side that doesn't have the guns? I mean, the thought process that we are expected to accept here, it just beggars belief. I really want somebody to explain this to me. If this is a problem that is shared by both sides, how come only one person is getting shot at repeatedly? And here's the problem, okay? The problem is not that the vast majority of Democratic elites and Democrats, don't wish Trump were dead. The problem is that they do. It's not a majority. About a third of Democrats admit to pollsters that they wish that the assassination attempts had succeeded. But I'm sure all of us have people in our lives who unfortunately we're close to, who have admitted to us also that they wish that he had succeeded. I mean, it is absolutely unbelievable. The bloodlust on the side that casts itself as the victims of stochastic terrorism again and again and again. And at least the first time around, they pretended that they were upset that somebody tried to kill Trump. But this time around, they just skipped over that step. I don't know if you noticed that, but the entire Democratic elite as a class went straight to blaming Trump's rhetoric for almost getting himself killed. It is astonishing. And what is going on there is victimhood in Democratic culture is currency. And so you can never allow your opponent or your enemy to be acknowledged as a victim, because that is to suggest that they have moral authority. That's how their brains work. And so they sit there enraged that Trump is actually the victim of these horrific crimes. They literally have like victim envy of the fact that their insane followers keep trying to kill him. It is so appalling. And Trump, the first time round, he took the high road. He refused to blame anybody. It was astonishing. In a presidential election, he refused to place the blame on the other side. And I think this time round, it's just so obvious who this guy is listening to, who this guy was reading, which magazines and which publications. He sounds like every person on MSNBC. I'm sorry. I mean, he just sounds exactly like the party line of the other side. And I think it was just to ask too much for Trump's campaign not to, but we should be outraged. I mean, it is so unbelievably outrageous at a human level, at a spiritual level, at a moral level, and at a political level, what was done to this man last week.
I will say one thing is that he did actually submit to that after the first attempt, and said in the debate that the quote was, "I took a bullet to." I don't think he said almost. I think he said, I almost or probably took a bullet to the head because of the rhetoric of Democrats. I mean, and I think it was too inviting of a charge to not make on that debate stage. But, I'll say one thing in defense of America in general is that we are fairly good when it comes to political violence. All one has to do is thumb through a newspaper and see the number of assassination attempts. Robert Fico, who was the prime minister of Slovenia, was shot. Shinzo Abe was murdered in Japan, a place that almost has no homicides. So we do fairly well in these things. We don't have battles in the street like you would do in certain places in South America. I mean, contested election, a stolen election in Venezuela. And how many people ended up dead in the protests? 10, 15, something like that. Very common. So, we do okay as far as these things go. But obviously, the rhetoric has gotten a bit crazy. I just
Right.
don't blame anyone but the shooters themselves.
Yeah, I mean, where we're not doing well though is with our corporate media, which is, I mean, I have a lot of sympathy for what Batya was just saying. I mean, if you go back and you watch the crazy RNC, and it was a pretty crazy convention, but if you watch the speeches again, they were predicting in their speeches that the contest was over because Trump had just been shot. He behaved very well and admirably. He, was thinking about his supporters. They were so loyal. They didn't stampede. They just stayed. They were worried about him. I mean, it was kind of a really remarkable moment in our political history. What no one was expecting was that the media would just immediately turn the page. And in this case, a second assassination attempt, it was even less, as Batya mentioned. It was like, I don't know if it was a full 24 hours of news cycle. Now, we all know what would have happened, God forbid, if Kamala had been shot at. It would have been endless up until the election, the coverage. And the media is playing a role in electing Kamala Harris. Right now, the elite media is absolutely playing a role, pushing for their candidate. They're not reporting on news. They're not looking at anything in any way objectively. They're not even giving her half decent questions. As I think JD Vance actually pointed this out, and I thought it was one good point that he made, that when Dana Bash interviewed Kamala, she gave her multiple choice answers. She gave her a list of options for how to answer the question. I've never seen that before in an interview. So I think the media has really played a disgraceful role in all of this.